Hey there, it's Melissa Mortensen from polkadottear.com, and I am excited to welcome you to the third week of the Tailored Tulips Quilt Along. If you're new here, welcome. This is the third video in our Tailored Tulips Quilt Along, and if you want to join in, there is still time. The videos for the previous steps and for this step will remain on my YouTube channel indefinitely. I don't have plans to delete them, so I don't feel like you have to catch up or anything like that. Jump in anytime. And if you have questions during any part of the construction process, be sure to leave a comment even if this video has been up for a few months. I keep a close eye on the comments to see if you guys have questions about any of the projects that we're making. The Tailored Tulips quilt is a fun spring quilt pattern that is made using our Tailored Tulips pattern and then a 10-inch pre-cut stack of fabric, sometimes called a layer cake. I'm using the Tulip Cottage fabric collection. That's my newest collection with Riley Blake Designs. Last week, I walked you through the steps to create the top of the tulip blocks, and then this week, I'm going to walk you through the steps to create the bottom of the tulip block, which is the leaf and the stem portion of the block. You will need the pattern to follow along. It's linked here in my YouTube video. You can also find it on my website, shop.polkadottear.com. And if you haven't already, take a second and subscribe to my channel. My kids and my husband are always badgering me that I forget to mention that in all of my videos, but it really does make a difference if you take a second to subscribe. Helps me know what kind of content to plan for the future for projects that I hope that you guys will enjoy sewing. So with all of that said, we are ready to start constructing the bottom portion of the quilt block. All right, let's start making the bottom half of this block. So here we've got our tulip block that we made last week. I'm just going to set that aside. And you've got a stack of fabric pieces that you're going to use to make the bottom half of the quilt block. So we've got some background fabrics, and just a reminder, there was a correction on the pattern that these pieces are 1.5 by 1.5. I mentioned it a few times in previous videos. And then you've got a stack of various prints of leaf fabric. Just as with the tulip block, the tulip top of the block, this block is constructed with a right and a left side, and we're going to start with the left side. Now, how you handle the fabric layout on this block is up to you. What I chose to do with mine was to match the prints here and to match the prints here. You can match, I'm not sure how the math works out with what you cut from what piece of fabric, but you can, if you want, you can match all four the same. You can just do something totally random and just do it that way too. That would also be cute, but maybe kind of take a minute and make a mental note of how you want those to lay out. And then you've got your stem fabric cut out also as well. As far as supplies that you need for this, I have my acrylic ruler. I like to, when I'm doing smaller projects like this, I like to have a smaller ruler close by for trimming. This is a Creative Grids. It's a 3.5 by 12.5 inch ruler. You're going to want some sort of fabric safe marking pen. I like to use the friction pens. Scissors, just because these are my favorite scissors. I have 3 pair of them. I've stashed them all over my sewing room. I have one in my embroidery box. Anyway, I don't know what it is about them. I just really like them so much, and I'll link them for you guys below. But keep these close by. Great for trimming little strings and threads off of things. And then I prefer to use a smaller rotary cutter when I'm working with smaller pieces like this. But again, that's just preference. This is an Olfa 28mm rotary cutter. Then as far as setup, I have a wool pressing mat, and underneath it I have a portable pressing mat because I've noticed that the heat does transfer from the wool pressing mat onto my cutting mat when I have it on my table, and the cutting mat may warp a little bit. So I've got this under to kind of absorb some of the extra heat. And then I have my little Alicio M3 iron and a tailor's clapper. This is the Riley Blake tailor's clapper. So for those of you guys that ask for a little more in detailed supplies, that is what I'm working with. And we're going to set this aside just so we don't have as many things on the table. Kind of get organized a little bit here. All right. So I'm going to start with the left side. So I'm going to choose to do it the same way where I have the 2 leaves matched side to side. And I kept these randomly, but I am going to double check and see if any of these would be cuter fussy cut than others, and definitely want to make use of the cute little blue house if we can. So I'll put that one aside. So I'm going to use those pieces for this leaf block. So these will be my left pieces and these will be my right pieces. So you're going to take, and you can do, I would recommend as you're making your quilt, do all the left side, then do all the right side, for the same reason as last week where you can get mixed up with which directions the seams go. And I just think muscle memory, it just makes it easier if you're doing all the lefts and then switch modes and do all of the rights. All right, so we need 2 small pieces and 2 bigger squares. I'll move these out of the way. And on all of your square fabrics, you are going to take that Fabric Safe marking pen and draw a diagonal line. It's always hard to do this with the camera because usually I do this standing up, so sometimes it's a little harder sitting down. Mark these with that Fabric Safe pen. Those are marked. All right, so using the diagram, I need to figure out which way to put my pieces. So this larger piece needs to be in this corner and the smaller piece needs to be in this corner, and you need to have it so that the seam lines are parallel to each other. So I got that one ready. Got this one ready. And I'm going to take this to my machine and sew, and I am going to chain piece this. So I'm going to start with the smaller pieces and then do the larger pieces. So I'll need to take these off before I sew, but I wanted you to see how it goes together that way. All right, these are sewn, so you can see I've got 2 left leaf pieces. Now, the same as with last week, you can cut first and then press, but I prefer to press first. So I'm going to bring these to my iron, press them in place, and you'll see I have a little mistake on this one, but I'm going to leave it because I can show you something for it. I'll press that, and then I like to stick it under the clapper to kind of keep it from getting a little wonky. Looks like I did the same thing on this side. All right, so this one is a little messed up, which actually I feel like is to the benefit. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this. So as you can see right here, from the back, it's straight. From the front, I came up a little short right here. And this one from the back, it looks like I have a little bit coming off the side there and off the bottom, but not terrible. So what I'm going to do on this one, and this trick usually only works if you're working with background fabrics that are darker than your other fabrics, is instead of removing this whole thing, I'm just going to remove the middle to get the bulk out. And then I'm going to leave that corner in place because I know that that corner is square. So when I go to sew the leaves together, I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's going to get caught in the seam allowance and you won't even notice that it's there. This one, and also another thing, I'm working with these smaller ones, squares. Looks like I missed a little bit of stitching there, so I'll go back in and fix that off camera. I prefer to use scissors instead of a cutting mat and ruler when I'm working with smaller pieces like this. I just think it's quicker and it's nicer to kind of sit if you want to, you know, you've got hundreds of little leaf blocks to make, so if you want to sit by the TV and trim those, I just think it's a little bit easier. So there's that one. And then this one, checking from the back, we can see, yeah, I'm off by quite a bit there. You can always remove your stitches and start again. It's up to you. But like I said, I usually mess up when I'm doing this on camera because I'm working backwards from how I normally work. So trim that square. And then on the front, it looks like we're pretty good. So I'll go ahead and remove both layers there. And remove both layers there. So now I have clipped those corners and I have done it in a way that's maintained a right angle on those corners so that they will be flat. So now I have my two left side leaf pieces. I'm going to do the same thing to the right side, and this time I'm going to make sure, as noted in the diagram, that I'm going to have the seams going the other direction so that those will make the right side of the leaves. All right, I have my right sides and my left sides sewn. Move these out of the way so I don't get my hand on the iron. So you can see that these leaves are mirror images of each other. I'm just going to keep following along with the directions as noted, moving to the next step. And you've got some extra rectangles of background fabric cut. So these are just going to get sewn together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, like so. All right, so I'm going to sew this to this to this to this to this, and then this to this to this to this to this, and then I'm going to press the fabrics, and I'll show you the next step after that. All right, so I have the left side and the right side blocks sewn together. I want to point out, just to make sure that you guys noticed it, is the diagram is here on page 6 of the printed pattern, but just make sure you note that this piece right here is a different size than these two pieces. If you put all of these 3 the same pieces, then your block's not going to end up the right size. So make sure you know that this top rectangle is larger. So I have those 2 sewn, and then as far as pressing, in this case, I think it's easiest to go with what I consider a path of least resistance. So these seams want to lay flat, so I've pressed them so that they can lay flat. And then the last thing you need to do for this portion of the block is you need to sew each side to the stem piece. Now you can see that this has kind of gotten a little wonky as I've been pressing and sewing. So what I'm going to do is I will take a minute and pin this just to make sure that I've got everything as straight as possible when I sew, and then I'll double check and make sure I use a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that I get a nice straight stem piece. That has been sewn and pressed, and once again I went with path of least resistance and pressed this seam towards the stem fabric. The last thing you need to do is find your tulip top from last week. Easier said than done for me. You guys should see the mess that's just outside the camera. I'm gonna have to zoom this out again. All right. So then you are just going to sew the tulip top piece to the tulip, sew the tulip top piece to the tulip bottom piece. All right, I stitched that. I'm just going to press that seam and then flip this up. And I think that seam wants to go towards the stem portion. Double check it on the back. Everything's going the same direction. And there you can see you have a completed tulip quilt block. Now you notice that mine is a little wonky side to side, so what I would do, so this block should be 6.5 wide, and I would do this on my other cutting mat where I can get things lined up a little bit better, but the top is 6.5. So what I would do, and I'm not going to do it right now because I want to double check that I've got everything in the right spot before I do it, is I'll take my ruler and just trim this so it's got straight edges, making sure that it stays 6.5 inches wide. The last thing to double check is, and I'm afraid to check mine on camera, it's always harder to do something when people are watching. So your block should be 14.5 inches long, and thank goodness mine is 14.5 inches long. If it is longer, you need to trim it, because even a 1/4 inch, if you have, 5 tulip blocks sewn together, even an extra 1/4 inch on all 5 of those blocks, it's going to make that piece a 1/4 inch times, like 1.25 inches too long, and so your sashing strips aren't going to fit. So at the end of this, take this to, I'll take this to my other cutting mat where I've got a little more precise measurements, and I'm going to trim it, square it up, make sure that it is 6.5 by 14.5, and then we will be ready for next week, where we get to start putting the quilt together.